And so, once more, we approached that time of the year in which I sit back and revel in the myriad childhood traumas which turned me into the deranged freak that I am in the modern day. June 13th has arrived, and with it, a period of mourning over the part of me that could have been. If you don't know, I am preparing this video in advance, as I often do, so that I may take that day to genuinely collect myself, because even after 17 years, this is the kind of thing that will always haunt me. I've talked about this a few times in passing. It was one of my first road trip talks back in 2023, and then I referenced it again last year at the end of my Grid 2 playthrough, as well as in a few other videos from around that time. But we're doing it differently for this one. We're actually getting into the weeds of it. The why trauma of any kind is just such a debilitating thing, and how for every step you take to move forward, you can just as easily get knocked back down. Some of the stuff is actually going to be very explicit, so viewer discretion is advised for this video. With that, let us go back 17 years, plus a little bit extra this time. It was the fall of 2007. This is where our story starts. 2007 was the year of my 14th birthday. It was the year that I entered high school, the year that I started learning how to drive, if I'm being honest, and it was the year that I first came out to my parents about being non-binary or transgender. I say or because when I looked into figuring all this shit out for myself, I was more of a mix of being masculine and feminine. I didn't quite meet the DSM-4 criteria for being trans, and I doubt I would have met all of the DSM-5 criteria if that had actually been around back then. But the thing is, I had known since I was in middle school that I would never be a normal male. I leaned toward being girly in many ways, and of these, the most critical was an aspiration toward flexibility. I think I was around 10 when I first tried to put my legs behind my head, though by the time I had turned 14, I had become very, very good at it. It was a bit of a trick of mine that I would show off during gym class. I'd also wanted to learn things like splits and other gymnastics moves, but remember, those things were for girls, so I had to continually use discretion about what my motives were. Given all the hubbub surrounding my feminine tendencies, I'd be lying if I didn't talk of how my 14th year was honestly pretty terrible. I had a bit of a falling out between myself and my parents, inadvertently fell into a deep depression, and even dropped out of high school for about 3 months. I mean, I did go back before any lasting academic damage could be done, so I guess I got lucky there. Winter turned to spring. Things with my parents simmered down a bit, and I started to find my footing again, eased back into some semblance of routine, but then, well, there came a certain doctor visit. I had a noticeable hunchback that had developed over the span of many years. Turns out my brother did too. Everyone thought it might be scoliosis. Turns out it was something much worse. We both had what is known as Sherman's kyphosis. What this means is the kyphotic curve of the thoracic spine is greatly exaggerated. For most people, it is a 30 to 40 degree curve. For me, it was between 82 and 87 degrees. Suddenly, it made perfect sense why I'd been able to put my legs behind my head so easily, and fold in half, and other things. Of course, a doctor is going to say that is not normal. And the thing about Sherman's is, if left untreated, it won't kill you, but it will make you wish that it had. If you hit your 30s and your curve is that severe, it is going to collapse your ribcage, atrophy your spine from top to bottom, and you'll most likely end up with chronic pain and mobility problems that put you in a wheelchair. So, while moderate cases can get away with physical therapy or wearing a back brace, at the time, the only treatment my brother and I had available was extreme spinal fusion. We're talking the fusion of not 2, 3, or even 4 vertebrae, but all vertebrae within the thoracic spine, of which most people have 12. Most. Trust me, we'll get to that. Our surgeries were scheduled for June 13th, 2008. Oh, and this was a Friday the 13th for the superstitious crowd. What could possibly go wrong? I am going to take you through that experience and the days that followed. We arrived at the hospital early that morning. Prep was started and my brother was taken in first. These surgeries are long, like 5.5 hours. All I could do was lay there in a pre-op room and wait for that first 5 hours. The doctors eventually came in to say that my brother's surgery had been a success and that it was my turn. They wheeled me into the OR, gave me anesthesia, and then darkness. When I next woke up, it was around 9:30 at night. I was in ICU, my brother was in a bed next to me. The nurses came to check on me, then my brother. I could not move a single bit of my body other than my neck. That should tell you the sheer amount of morphine they were pumping into me at that time. I fell back asleep maybe 30 minutes later. This began a 3-day period of being asleep and awake. That is the only way to describe it. I would wake up if I was in pain. I would fall asleep if I wasn't. When I was awake, I could get a glimpse of the room around me. I was aware that a few beds down, there was an infant that was in critical condition. So I got to witness that infant's gradual deterioration. Around the afternoon of the second day, which felt like a fourth day due to that sleep-wake cycle, I have memories of my mother trying to feed me under the supervision of the doctor. It was plain yogurt. I tried to swallow it down, but then an extreme bit of nausea caused me to spit it back up. The amount of pain in that particular moment was so extreme that it felt like my soul had been ejected from my body. I remember the doctors flooding me with more morphine, and then I was out. Memories become hazy as we enter the third day. A few beds down, the worst had happened, and that infant was taken off life support. It had passed away. I remember sitting there, and this existential dread took over. That is the only way I can describe it. On the third night, my father was there, watching over me. I turned to him, and I told him, I don't think I am going to make it out of this hospital. I wonder how he took that in that moment. I have never asked him about it, and I'm never going to. But the thing is, as I closed my eyes that final time, I really sincerely thought that was game over. And maybe it was. I want to explain something, and this is where things get kind of metaphysical. When I woke up on that fourth day, it was as if my recovery had accelerated through the night. The pain had lessened significantly, allowing me to get off morphine. My brother and I were able to be moved out of ICU and into an outpatient room. The next 4 days would be a slow burn, and I mean that literally. After getting off morphine, I had horrible heartburn for those 4 days, and they had to give me round-the-clock medicine for that. But really, looking back on that, the stark contrast between the third night and the fourth day, sometimes it makes me wonder if another me had died, and I awoke in a reality different from the one I was in. I think about this a lot, and I want to sort of explain my thought process. When we dream, it is like we are awake in realities outside of this one. And I would argue that there are an infinite number of them. These realities are ones in which we make different life choices and ultimately experience different outcomes. We live and we die at different times. So if on that night in the ICU, I had a 50% chance of living or dying, there is one reality where I died and one where I lived. And this reality I am in now is the latter. Though that also implies there are realities where I never had the spinal surgery at all. And that's going to be very important as we go through this. But regardless of whether that is what happened on some cosmic scale, the point is, I survived the experience, made it through 4 days in outpatient, and then finally was allowed to go home. And for most people, that should be where this kind of experience ends, and they go back to a normal life. Only that isn't what happened either. A lot of things were different from the moment I left that hospital. The first major thing was that the fusion had forced open my rib cage. There had been a light overlap of my ribs prior to the surgery, and that was now gone. My respiration increased more than expected, and this caused me to hyperventilate subconsciously. I literally had to relearn to breathe. So that was a thing. Moving past that, in weaning me off morphine, they had put me on Vicodin. So I was allowed to be on it for about 3 or 4 months before they put me on regular Tylenol. And the pain was just miserable. As far as mobility, I was required to wear a back brace for 3 months, and so was my brother, but yeah. And I would have to go to physical therapy to get a lot of my balance and mobility back under my own control. So I did that, and we moved into the 6-month post-op mark. That was when the back braces came off for good. I was essentially fully fused at that point. And that was when I noticed the full extent of the changes. My flexibility was essentially cut in half. I could not fold in half anymore because my thoracic spine no longer moved. Period. End of story. All of my spinal mobility is in my neck and lower back, and it has been like that ever since. But because my lower back was also very flexible, I did figure out that I could still put my legs behind my head if I practiced it. I could still hold on to a fragment of something that I tied so invariably to my own quest for femininity. And that meant something. While I wished that could have been the end of it, the problems were, unfortunately, just getting started. So, really getting into it, things started to go wrong in a major way from this point on. For starters, I had become more susceptible to respiratory infections and pneumonia during winter, and I had no idea why. I then started to get chronic pain in my shoulder, which has a rather inconvenient cause to it. It turned out, upon re-reviewing my x-rays, that I only had 11 thoracic vertebrae for unknown reasons, and not 12. Because they count from the bottom up in surgery, it means my fusion goes up into my neck ever so slightly. It was deemed unfixable, and the shoulder pain is a permanent part of my life. It will never go away. At 17, I had an accident where I slipped in the snow, fell, and cracked my head open. This also fractured my neck, and I had no idea of it. The doctors just never saw it. Years later, they would find a calcification at the site of the break, and they said if it had happened any higher or lower, I might have been a vegetable for the rest of my life. Kind of a scary thought. And by the time I hit 20, the chronic pain had spread to my lower back. The excessive use of my lumbar spine caused one of my discs to begin bulging excessively. And now at 31, I have 3 lumbar discs showing prominent damage, as well as significant muscle scarring. Regarding my lungs, it would seem that my ribcage is even more foobar than it was originally. Slipping ribs plus rearward compression by the metal rods over time due to my body growing in the last decade and a half ultimately has reduced my lung capacity by over a third. There is a lot wrong with my body, and none of it is fixable. None of it. So it really doesn't surprise me that I had a heart attack at 29, because honestly, my condition is a perfect storm for shit like that to happen. So with all of that in mind, how exactly have I handled it emotionally? The answer is not well at all. I'ma be full disclosure. As someone who was no stranger to being bullied relentlessly in school, there was perhaps one thing and one thing only that activated a berserk button in me. If someone accused me of overreacting about a health-related issue, I legitimately went off on them. Like, there was one time where I got a really bad nosebleed, had to be excused to take care of it, came back, and another student accused me of overreacting, and I just snapped and went at him in a flurry of punches. And ever since then, a lot of my biggest freakouts or mental health crises, self-harm, what have you, they have been triggered by my inability to do things that other people can do quite normally. Not having the same level of energy or resilience as people my own age. But I have had to accept that spinal fusion is a permanent disability, It is considered a permanent partial disability by the powers that be. I tried applying for Social Security recently. Like most people, I got denied, but the contents of the letter did give me a bit of pause, because it mentions in the letter that while I may have the ability to work, I am one of those people who needs accommodation. And that was genuinely the first time in I don't know how long that I have been told that directly. Because when people out on the street look at me, they think I look like an able-bodied adult. I don't show signs of having a physical disability unless you see my spinal scar, which normally I keep covered up. The downside of looking able-bodied is that most people think I am overreacting when I tell them how much pain I am in, or how difficult it is to breathe, or how I desperately need more help than I am getting right now. And as an adult, I can't just go off on someone for not knowing. So instead, I usually turn all that anger on myself. And this leads to me harming myself quite a bit. Like I said, this shit is not easy. Over the years, I have gotten really good at hiding it. But when it does get to be too much, I do end up in the ER. And sometimes that gets very close to requiring a 5150. My first 5150 was when I was 17, and there were some really fucked up circumstances that I will not go into in this video. All you need to know is I ended up in a mental health facility for 5 days. And I've tried very hard not to go back. But again, it's just not easy. All of it has made me wonder, rather extensively, if I just should have never had the spinal fusion in the first place, you know? Like, if we recap, the symptoms of non-treatment were chronic pain, loss of mobility, loss of lung function, and the possibility of ending up in a wheelchair. But even with the surgery, I have chronic pain, loss of mobility, loss of lung function, and the possibility of ending up in a wheelchair if my lower back completely gives out. There was genuinely no benefit to me ever having it. And I think I realized that by the time I was 17. I think as things started to go wrong, that was when I gave up on my life. I told myself that I was not going to live past 35. I told myself that I would live it up to the fullest in my 20s, never care about the consequences of my actions, and have nothing that I could not take with me to the grave. I lived that way up until the end of April 2023, when I had that heart attack. Because by May 2nd, when I finally went to a hospital that would actually fucking treat me, and they took my troponins and they told me, hey, your heart might be dying in real time because this has gone untreated for several days, what really hit me on that night was, I don't want this to be all I have to show for this crapsack life. And I ended up talking about that when I got home from the hospital. Really, that was when I started to attempt the whole VTuber thing in the first place. But ever since then, I have subconsciously felt like I am just living on borrowed time. Like, that is where my story should have ended. It would have been fitting in a way. But we're now 2 years past that, and we're 17 years past the spinal surgery. I am still here, broken, but alive. So, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. I've racked my brain about this ever since that happened. I leaned full force into YouTube at that point and didn't think too much about going back to work until I could get a more definitive examination of my situation. I'll say that much, given the Social Security decision, which showed up on my doorstep a few weeks ago as of making this video. There is a lot I wish I just could have done differently. I've said it before, but if I had a do-over, I'd have never gotten the spinal surgery. I just wouldn't have. I probably would have embraced my inner circus freak, dropped out of school for good, become a contortionist for real, and if I'm being truly full disclosure here, I would have entered the adult film industry. I mean that sincerely. That was something I always wanted to do. But ultimately, I would not have survived it physically, given my health problems. If there is anything to take away from this, My decision to essentially daylight on YouTube is my atonement for not having that night lighting aspect to my life. Because I can't do adult film, I decided to settle for more general content creation. And that's just the truth. I am doing YouTube because it allows me to settle. And that's pathetic. I know it is, but it's all I've got now. Am I gonna survive my 30s? I don't know. If I ever have another heart attack, it is going to kill me. And if my lower back gets any worse, I will end up in a wheelchair after all. I was already told this by a surgeon who reviewed my most recent imaging, which was taken about a year ago, so I do know what's coming. I thought that if I put this on paper, I could get to a point where all of this would be put into perspective, though I guess it's still very much hard to swallow. And that's the thing about trauma. There are still nights where I wake up in a cold sweat because I have nightmares that my pulse is just spiraling out of control in excess of 250 beats per minute. It is a scary thought. I also worry incessantly that when my legs fall asleep, I'll just one day lose all control of them, or that a muscle spasm in my shoulder will cause me to drop whatever I'm holding and send it crashing to the ground. There's a lot that just goes through my mind on any given day. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I think I am gonna call it here. If you listened, I can't thank you enough. Like I said, this video will go out on the anniversary of the surgery, and I will likely be taking that day off. So I'll be seeing you in another video. And again, thank you for watching.